Rolling? Okay. So, so I think we'll start with the song that we all know as Heyser Bulgar. It's probably the first version that any of us ever heard. Naftule Brandwein's famous recording from 1923. And pay attention. So this is, as you'll see, so there are multiple versions of this. So there's actually a version, what I'm calling version 1, comes in sort of 2 flavors. One is with 3 sections and one is with 4. This is I'm playing this one because it's the most complete. It's actually got 4 sections. So one thing to pay attention to, like I was talking to before, is how many sections are there? Do they repeat? How long are the sections and stuff? Because it's going to change as we go through this. So this is a little bit of a listening exercise. Here we go. So that's the famous version. Just to back up a little bit, to put this in a little bit more context, and then I'll come back to this at the end, are that the connections between Yiddish and Ottoman Greek musical traditions run very deep and seem to have developed based on a number of interactions historically over a number of centuries and on several continents. So there's, in my opinion, there's no specific or single smoking gun that ties these 2 musical traditions together. They're interwoven together in various ways. And this is actually part of what's in those 1 or 2 articles of Seb Feldman's that were handed out for us to read. So he goes much more into the historical side of it, which I don't have time to do that today. But basically, that this musical tradition formed at the confluence of Yiddish music, and especially professional klezmer musicians, Bessarabian music, and more broadly some Moldavian, Wallachian music, and especially the professional Lautari, the Roma professional musicians, Ottoman Greeks, very important, and also Bulgarian musical styles. Those are the main ones. There's others, Krim, Tatar, and so forth. But so we're basically talking about the urban professional musical traditions of the klezmorim and of these other groups of musicians either active in Asia Minor, some of the Aegean islands off the coast of Turkey, and then in Eastern Europe, and there was interaction going in both directions. Okay, and also that the music, it's very specific, very culturally selective, right? So we're not talking that all of Yiddish music and all of Greek music are related. It's a very small subset of each, actually, where you have, it's like a Venn diagram, and in the middle with the shaded part is where they meet. Okay, so from this tune I have many, many different versions. This is one of the richest sources, I think, of any of the klezmer tunes I can think of. I found 19 different Yiddish sources, 13 of which were recorded and 6 notated in music, and also 4 Greek recordings. So it's less prevalent in Greece, but prevalent nonetheless. Okay, so let's move on. No, there we go. Okay, so this is what I'm calling version 2. It doesn't matter, it's totally arbitrary, but this is what most of us, if we know this at all, we know it as the Heyser Bulgar. Interestingly, Nikolaev is on the Black Sea, right? So Black Sea plays a very important role in all of these connections. And there were Greek and Jewish communities there. Okay, so you'll notice one thing, when we think of Heyser Bulgar, mostly we think of that first section, because that's the one that appears in almost every single version. And then sometimes there's nothing in common. So for example, this recording by the Harry Kendall Orchestra from 1918, it contains that first section, and then it has another, the second part isn't related at all. It's a different tune. So we're seeing, this sort of tells us a lot about how the musicians put these tunes together and thought about composition as much as or improvisation. Oops. We might think, oh, well, first of all, both of these versions we listen to, well, they sound like any old klezmer tune, right? It could be anything. It sounds just as klezmery as anything we know. And it could be, wow, this is like a different tune. It uses the same section, but big deal. We see that all the time. Okay, so let's bookmark that and move on. Okay, so this is from a non-commercial recording. So I've been corresponding for many, many years with Musa Berlin, who's of his generation, the leading klezmer performer in Israel, who learned from a man named Segal, who may or may not have descended from klezmer musicians in Romania. And Musa was the first, actually he was the first musician anywhere who started, this was in the early 1960s, started reviving earlier klezmer tunes and incorporating them into the Hasidic wedding repertoire in Israel. And so this particular tune, he had never heard Harry Kendall before. He'd never heard a klezmer 78, but he met a Romanian, Hasidic Romanian immigrant to Israel in the early 1960s, and the guy sang it to him. He wasn't even a musician. So this is what he played.
Joel,
yes.
hang on 1 second before you play it. I want to ask the people who are listening to this lecture, if you hear a word that you don't know,
yes,
write it down and give us a chance to tell you what it means.
Yes.
So Joel's talking about Hasidic. If you're
Yes.
not sure what that means, write it down, take a note on it, and bring it to us later so we have a chance to answer those questions. Okay?
Right. Right. So Hasidic is like the dancing we were just doing, and the singing.
Well,
Okay, so this is what he learned from this guy, Zilberschlag. Sorry for the buzz. It's on the recording. This recording is from 60 years ago. 60 years ago. So it's very interesting to see. So this was obviously, we could have thought, well, the Candel version was, the second part of the Candel version was created in the US maybe. We'd never heard another European version, and here's now it comes up, it turns out that, you know, he learned this directly from a Romanian immigrant. So that's an interesting detail. Okay, so now we might think, okay, these are two different tunes. But it's all starting to come together. You'll see it's like a spider's web as we kind of move through this, but you'll see the interactions between these different versions. So this is a version by Israel J. Hochman's orchestra from New York, 1922, called Naftule Bulgar. Naftule is sort of on the border between Ukraine and Bessarabia. And you'll hear that it's the same as the Candel version. There's also another one by Mishka Tsiganov with the same two parts, but this one's got a third part. So bookmark that third part because it's going to play a big role in this. That third bit is the second most important strain of this whole chain of melodies. Okay, so this is what I'm calling version 3. This is a little bit of an anomaly because there's only one version of the tune in this particular combination. We don't know anything about Vasily Melnikov, the accordionist. They could have been Russian Rome, he could have been Bulgarian, we don't know. But but Michael Dmitri is a pseudonym for Mishka Tsiganov, so that would sort of imply maybe that this Melnikov was also a Rom from, a gypsy from Odessa. We don't know. But anyway, it's an interesting version, you'll notice, because it's got that bit we just heard from the Hochman. It's got 2 bits from the Brandwein, not just the first part, but also the last part. And also listen to the first phrase, it's got an extra beat, an extra bar. So it's the only version that has that. So I don't know, that kind of, to me, points to the fact that this Melnikov was maybe not a klezmer. Okay, so this is what I'm calling version 4. This is the Arbeitsmann, the working man, by Belf's Romanian Orchestra. On first glance, it doesn't sound like Heyser Bulgar, but it kind of gives itself away in the middle. But interestingly, it's not played as a Bulgar. You'll notice the first two sections. The first section is a kind of a variant of the beginning of the famous version of the Heyser Bulgar. The second section is a kind of a variant of the first section. So it's almost like section A and section A prime, and it's slow, and then it goes into the third part, it goes into Bulgar tempo, and then it goes back again. So this is one of the rare recordings that points to the fact that, yeah, klezmer bands played, with retards and tempo changes and all those kinds of things, even with dance music.
Especially given the title, that it has a title called Melodies, as if it's a song. I'm wondering if this was a theater song set to this melody, and the final section where it speeds up is actually the break used in the theater.
It's a great idea. I could just see like Aaron Lebedev or something performing this on the Warsaw stage or something like that. Yeah. There's so much we don't know. And sometimes, I was finding stuff up until the very last minute. Like the day before I came to Weimar yesterday, I was already still finding things. So, okay. And so I don't know if you can read this, but you'll see this is a printed version from the Kostakovsky collection that was published in New York in 1916. And this is basically the same version that we just listened to by Belf, but it's closer to Heyser Bulgar. It's good now. So it's closer to the other versions, whereas the Belf one is a little bit cryptic. But it's got the same sections, even with the dee-dee-dee-dum, dee-dee-dee-dum, dee-dee-dee-dee-dum at the end. Okay, so this is now, right, so everything we've looked at so far were except for the Musa Berlin version that you learned from this Romanian, were American versions, but now that we've had access to the Berezovsky collections and now to the Kisselhoff collection, it came across a couple of variants of this melody as well. This is one actually that I've been playing for years, and it's again, it was listed in the collection as a skoczna, which usually implies a somewhat slower tempo and a different dance. So skoczna is basically a frejlux, right? It would be different dance steps, theoretically. We'll get to the dance part later. So there's no recordings of this that I could, there is a recording, but it's sitting in Kiev and isn't accessible to us at this point. But this is my band performing it just so you can hear it. And you can hear this first part isn't related to any of the other bits we've listened to so far. So, and then I thought, well, that's interesting. This is the first performance that I've heard where the famous section didn't come at the beginning of the tune. So then, a couple months ago, I came across this, which is from the Kisselhoff manuscript, listed as Bulgar. And lo and behold, it's the same, basically the same version that we just listened to, but with the famous bit as the A section and the other part as the B section. But there's a third section that's related to the so it's all kind of coming together. I'm going to try to play this. It's in F Freygish. They didn't just play in D in those days, and it's kind of funky handwriting. But I'll try to play it just to give you an idea. So the B part. Oh. Sorry. Then the last part goes. So it's much more Bulgari. So this is now tying the skoczna back to the other versions via the dance form, via the A section, and also with this kind of, I don't know what you call these, it's like filler, right? They're all the same. They're all variants of the same thing. So, okay. So finally, one more Yiddish version, which is also somewhat of an anomaly. This is from the Abe Schwartz Library of Congress collection, right? So the klezmer musicians, well, all musicians, copyrighted their materials, even if it was traditional stuff. They said they were the author so that they would have copyright Max Leibowitz did it, Abe Schwartz did it, they all did it. So this is a version, another version, and it's got a different B section that doesn't sound like any of the other versions I've heard, but yet it's still got that same C sharp, the same dee-dee-dum, dee-dee-dum. So the B section goes like this, right? So it's a that's the end of the A, and then oh sorry, yeah, that's right. It's a very mix and match business we're in, right? So Abe Schwartz, he knew this other version that had a different B section. A lot of times they have a different B section and they'll have the same C section or the C and D and so forth. So, okay, so that's I'm going to stop with the Yiddish versions for the moment. Now we're going to switch to Greece.
So,
Yes?
I have some comments on the
Yes.
Yiddish versions, but would you like me to wait until you've gone through the Greek versions?
It depends on where it takes us.
Well, I guess two things. First
Yes.
of all, I wanted to say that the second version that you played us in the second section. Da, da, da,
Da, da, da, yeah, da, da, yeah.
This is made of these three-note combinations, right?
Yes.
And it's a slightly different rhythm, but it's also the material of da 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 dee da da dee da.
Yes.
A composer would recognize those as variants of the same three-note motif
That's a good point.
that are rhythmically variants of each other.
That's
They have
it.
slightly different harmonic implications, but they're really closely related to each other motivically. That was one thing.
That's entirely possible because I keep coming across, the more I focus on this, the more I find these interconnections.
Yeah, and that three-note descending thing, I mean, we learned last week from Kyriakos, is an extremely typical point in Greek music. All this all over the place, those three-note descending figures. So that's one thing.
Yes.
The other thing I wanted to say is that this what you call the filler section. I mean, I can think of dozens of Bulgarian auras which go da 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 da. For me, it just sounds like a little quotation of Bulgarian, Gaida or something like that at that point. So,
Yes, well, absolutely. And I mean, it's not an accident that they call the dance Bulgarish.
Yeah.
And the steps are the same as the Bravo, right?
Right.
Yeah, but and also that Bulgarians, Thracian Bulgarians especially, and I think Thracian Greeks,
Yes.
call it Gaida.
They call it Gaida, that's right. Yeah, Marty Schwartz has made this connection for years, that there are certain Gaida motifs that have made their way
Yeah.
into.
So especially it's
Gaida is a bagpipe.
Yeah, it's the range of a fifth.
Mm-hmm.
It goes, it's very, very
Yeah.
referring, I think, to Gaida music.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so one of the things is that Marty played for me a long time ago, probably 40 years ago, a version of this. And we'll get to it in a little bit because we now found some older versions, but this was a recording from the 1960s by a kanun player. Kanun is like a kind of a Turkish zither, named Nikos Stefanidis. He was the most famous living kanun player at that time. He was already in his 70s at the time the recording was made. And it had like big chunks of the Heyser Bulgar in there. And I was like, whoa, Nelly, what's going on here? I didn't know anything about the connections at that time. This was in 1981 or 2 or something like that. But later, so we'll get to that in a few minutes, but later, Marty discovered a recording by a guy named Mitsos. That's all we know, Compagnie Mitsos. We don't even know which instrument he played. But it's an early band, I think it was mandolin, accordion, and guitar, or something like that. We'll hear it in a minute. From 1906, recorded in Constantinople, so today's Istanbul. And you'll hear it's got several sections that are common to what we've been listening to up until now. version that we have from 1906, that doesn't mean that it was a Greek tune. We don't know, really. One of the things that I like to think of is that it was that this whole style was somewhat of a co-production that was flowing in both directions. Some parts of it were shared, some parts were learned by Greeks from Jews, some parts were learned by Jews from Greeks, and it's really, really hard to say. My feeling is because it's so wide, because this is so widespread among Jews that it was originally, at least that part of this conglomerate was a Yiddish invention, but it's impossible to say.
So that's probably Batamas, not mandolin.
I'm trying to remember what it means. Does it say anything on the label? It says mandolin.
Really?
Yeah.
To me, it sounds more
It's yeah, it's really, I mean, the recording is from 116 years ago, so. Okay, so I don't have a picture of the record label, it's only from YouTube, but this is the band, the Eleniki Estudiantina. These were groups of performers, singers, and players. This was the first one. I think it was based partially in Smyrna and partially in Constantinople. There was another one in Athens. They made many, many recordings. And so this is where they've taken now this melody, or parts of the melody, they've turned it into a political song. O Macedon, it's about Venizelos, who was the prime minister of Greece in the early part of the 20th century, and who led the opposition to King, what was it, Constantine the First? Who knows Greek history?
something like that. But he was overthrown quickly by Metaxas, the fascist.
Yeah, but that came afterwards. But in 1916 they formed the National Unity, or the Government of National Defense, or something like that, in Thessaloniki, in Salonika, and that's what this song is about. But you'll notice a lot of familiar bits to it. And newly composed material. So this is one of the things about Smyrnaica and Rebetica, is that they've taken bits, just like the klezmatics and some other groups do today, right? So they'll take a theater song, and in the middle they'll insert some klezmer bit from some other song, or they'll, it's the same idea here, and then they'll compose some new part. So sort of the same thing is going on here, I think. So that was apparently a well-known song in 1918, and then was probably forgotten. I've never heard another version of it until the feature film, the mockumentary, as Marty calls it, Rebetica, came out in 1983. Was a feature film about a fictional Rebetica singer. And this song was in the opening scene, so it sort of took on a new life, and now it's performed frequently, I would say, in Greece. And there's even an Israeli version with Zionist lyrics about the convoys, about the early years in Israel that was created after the Greek film. Okay, so here's a more accessible version. This is already now post-World War II, but Gus or Charlie. Gadinas was one of the most well-known Greek clarinetists in New York City, and he did a nice version of this. And one of the things about it, it's clearly based on the O Makedon, on the song we just listened to, but it also has a bridge. It's closer to sort of the Brandwein version, perhaps. So one might be tempted to say, well, because Gadinas played with and for the Jewish communities often with other klezmer musicians, and he did covers of some klezmer repertoire and so forth, it might be tempting to think that he learned it from Jewish musicians, and yet the second and third parts are more closely related to the Greek version. So my guess is he knew this from Greece. Okay, so, oh, sorry. Yeah, I wanted to compare these, because now I started hearing, like Alan, you were saying, well, this is in the Candel version is related to the Brandwein. Well, this is the same thing. I started hearing connections between the Gadinas and then even the O Makedon and the Brandwein version. So I put them side by side so we can listen to it. Yes.
The same contour.
It's the same, not even the same contour, it's also the same modal progression.
Right.
Moving to the minor 4 and back. So, but then I also realized, like, hey, wait a minute, I know this from somewhere else. And then I realized that Brandwein used the same section in another tune. And then I thought, well, my first inclination was, well, maybe he wrote it. But then when I found the connection to the Greek, I think he's just doing the same mix and match. He's covering himself, essentially. So here it is in 2 different songs. The title, Heyser Bulgar, again, is pointing to Black Sea, southern Ukraine, where there was a significant Greek population as well. Yeah.
I just want to remark that, we use the word Zuneufstellen, which means to put together.
Zuneufstellen.
Right, but actually compose means also to put together, to juxtapose together. So actually, for hundreds and hundreds of years, to compose wasn't to bring something that was completely original that nobody had ever heard of before. That's a rather recent development. Composers were people who took things that existed and put them together in novel ways and added something. That was a new composition, right? So this is less strange than we might think that it is.
Yeah, no, there's nothing, I mean, this is business as usual in the klezmer world, and I assume in the Greek world as well. I mean, I think this is a pan-Eastern European, Southeastern European phenomenon at a minimum. But anyway, so now we can listen to the version by Stefanidis or Stephanopoulos. He was listed on the label, but that's not the name he was very well known under. And this one's got a lot of sections, and it kind of draws together a lot of what we've been listening to up until now. And you'll notice it's because of the kanun, he's using makam tuning. So he does with a, well, I don't know what key he's playing it in, but it's with a, it's not an augmented second interval, right? The second tone is a half flatted. So like if we were playing in D, it would be an E half flat or something like that. Correct me. Oh, our Greek specialists out there, I can't see what my reading was. What's that? Well, you'll hear it. What seems like a new bit. So that's what I thought, that last bit was something new or different until I came across this. This is what you've all been waiting for, right? The Simchatan. So now it's tying to Jewish ritual, the dance of celebration, the ritual dance of celebration or something like that, by Abe Schwartz's orchestra in New York. And this is now the only version that doesn't have da 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 ya dee 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 da, and yet it's clearly the same tune. It's got, in fact, four of the 5 sections are found in some of in at least 1 or 2 of the versions we've been listening to so far. revelation to me, and this is where I sort of came up with this idea of what I've been calling the tune group, which is because it's more than just a tune, and it's more than just composition, but there's about 6 or 8 of these sections that you would probably never play all 8 of them in one performance, but it's like a menu that you know, it's like you make a curry. You know, if you've got turmeric and cumin and chili, but you don't have coriander and ginger or something, it still tastes like a curry, even though it doesn't have those 2 parts. Some sort of something like that. They're related tune sections that are sort of available for mixing and matching in various ways. Because either because they were historically part of some larger tune, or we don't really know. But I've seen this in other. This is not the only tune where this is the case. Yeah, Michael, are you raising a hand?
Yeah, just that the Schwartz version that you just played seems to have at least part of the klezmer in la, to me, I never really thought about it before. It's almost like a version of this whole, a variant of this whole.
It could be. Well, so then you get into the idea of larger sort of
then it
tune.
goes into which is part of that.
Yeah, so then, I mean, we get into larger sort of like there's modal similarities that are, you know, there's certain modal progressions that have certain melodic shapes. Just like in Turkish classical music, there's this thing called seyir, right? That has the makam has a certain, it's not just a scale, it's motifs that have a certain shape and a certain progression of modulations and so forth. And this on a much more simplistic level is taking place, I think. So you'll have like these tunes in what we call the Phragish mode that have similar shapes. They share even sometimes a bar or two, a motif that might be a bar or two long, but they're not the same tune, but they're like distant cousins or something like that. So this is sort of the same thing. When I heard the Schwartz, and then I thought like, wait a minute, this sounds really familiar. So then I started putting it side by side with the Stefanidis version, and you'll see it's not exactly the same, but it's so close to being almost the same that I don't think it's coincidental, and I don't think it's just because they're from a similar tune family. I think it's actually variants of the same melody, which points to distance. So I think that these connections go much further back than we originally thought, maybe back to the early 19th or even the late 18th century. We don't know how old these tunes are, but certainly the ingredients go back that far. It's like circumstantial evidence, right? If it wasn't for all of the other factors that point to the relationship, you might just shrug your shoulders. But because it's taking place in these 2 songs that have multiple sections that are related, it seems to be more than just random.
Joel, the second one sounded a little bit, the Greek one sounded a little bit like Bearish Cats to me.
Yeah, well, so there's the same thing. That's another one of these. Yeah, that's another one of these things where, like, Bearish Cats was very well versed in the repertoire. I'm sure he knew that, or probably even played on the Abe Schwartz recording that we just listened to. So, okay, and so here now we've got the different versions of this filler section, whatever we want to call it. just want to show a couple of anomalies, and Michael, it's a good thing you're here because I'm sure you can comment on this. But as you probably remember, I think you even wrote about this, the Uncle Moses, the famous wedding scene in the Yiddish film Uncle Moses from 1932, which is supposed to be depicting I think the novel that it was based on wasn't it about a labor strike in 1917 or something like that? So it's depicting Yiddish New York in the 1910s. And this tune plays an important role in that. If I only knew how to play it, there we go. But as you'll see, it's badly edited, the sound editing. I mean, it was very crude. It was one of the early talkies. So the sound jumps, it's hard to tell where the tune starts and where it ends. So there's two different tunes, maybe it's the Heyser Bulgar beginning with two other sections that we didn't previously know. It's impossible to tell from the way the camera editing and the sound editing is. But the interesting thing is they're not dancing a Bulgar. They're dancing a Freylax.
Like a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, except nowadays it's probably the other way around. A lot of people would dance Bulgar to a Freylax. Here they're dancing Freylax to a Bulgar. Oh, sorry. Well, here you can see the band. A second, there we go. I don't think we figured out who they are. Okay, let me skip forward to the dance part. Here. Okay, so the Heyser Bulgar music doesn't come back, but it comes earlier in the scene where they're dancing. So it's not really clear whether it's two different tunes. The second and third sections sounds more like a Freylax or a Ligon or something to me but it's clearly the same band. They were playing live as far as anybody knows. So maybe I don't know if you have anything.
I mean, I think an awful lot of people danced just Freylax, the Jewish dance to like these tunes, and didn't, it wasn't that strict division, other than among, Bessarabian, Romanian, and, South Podolian Jews who really knew this, what we call Bulgar now, who knew those steps and actually did them. Although those steps also, the dance steps also diffused throughout a lot of Eastern Europe, but the kind of rigidity about, this is a Bulgar, this is dance like this, and this is a Freylax, and everybody dances like this. That just to me is not realistic.
And I don't think the musicians thought that way either, to be honest.
And interesting, in the film, not that, that Marty Schwartz or Uncle Moses was really responsible for musical and dance terminology, but he says, spielt mir ab bei englische Freylax, a jüdische Freylax,
That's right. Play me a down-home tune.
Yeah.
And then they play this Bulgar. Well, it is down. It depends on where down home is. I don't think we need to see the Rebettica sequence.
Let's see a little bit.
You want to see a little bit? Okay. It's kind of hokey, but. had to do with whether Greece should enter World War I and on which side. That's what the main argument between the progressive forces and the king's side were, as far as I understand it. Okay, but so actually this has taken on a life of its own, and so this is one thing, is that then Arik Einstein, who was the first and probably one of the most famous Israeli rock stars or pop stars, popularized this version called the Song of the Convoy, and in Hebrew. This was 1987.
בלשונות רבות נספור בלבדנו, וזה את זה כמעט בכלל שלא הכרנו, ומקומות רבים מאוד גזרנו, ורק מקום אחד רצינו ואהבנו, ומקומות רבים מאוד גזרנו, ואל הארץ אל הארץ באנו. ונמשכת שיירה, מן המאה שעברה, רחוקים כבר היוצאים, איכרים וחלוצים, שעמלו עמדו בדרך מלראות את סוף הדרך. ועכשיו עוברים אנחנו, לא שקטנו ולא נחנו, לא ימשיכו בלעדינו, זוהי הרפתקת חיינו.
Okay, and then in kind of life imitates art, Musa Berlin sent me a version. Now he's playing this. He'd never heard O Macedon, but he knew the Arik Einstein version, so he's been playing this at weddings. This is just a rehearsal tape, so it's not the whole song, but... Yeah, we should.
Instrument classes. But I just wanted to say two things, if it's okay, to kind of bouncing off, come up to the front so people don't have to turn around. First of all, thank you for this. With your typical meticulous scholarship and great ears and great analysis, amazing. I don't know if you're all aware that Joel is one of the few professors that we've ever had for Yiddish and klezmer music in the last 30 or 40 years, and it's really great to have you give a lecture and an example of this kind of scholarly work here at Yiddish Summer Weimar. Thank you. Not only being a great, amazing player, but also a great scholar. Thank you for that.
The audience for this kind of a talk is not large, but if I can't do it in Weimar, where else
Can't do it
am I gonna
nowhere,
do it?
right. So the second thing I wanted to say is that there's a nice little technical term for this thing that Joel was talking about, tune groups and things like this, and there's probably even a good mathematical expression for it. Ben, you can tell us about that. But I'm thinking about Wittgenstein, philosopher Wittgenstein, who used the term he called family resemblance.
Yes.
And when he says about family resemblances, if you look at it, you ask the question, what's a member? How do you know whether someone's a member of a family or not, right? When you look at a big photograph of a big family with like 3 generations and lots of cousins and everything, and you say, well, these people all have the same nose, and these people all have the same chin, And these people have the same ears, but there isn't any one thing that they all have. So then the other thing which is interesting about that, so in old philosophical terms, that means that there's no necessary condition for being a member of the family. You can't say you have to have that nose to be a member of the family, because it turns out there are people who aren't in that family who have that nose too, right? So there's overlap with people outside the group. But it's a kind of a statistical, I've always understood we could call this a fuzzy set, but I'm afraid to say it in front of you.
It's good.
Okay, it's a fuzzy set. It's a set that doesn't have clean boundaries. It's a bunch of shared properties. And what Joel is talking about, tune groups, like here are 5 different melodies, and sometimes it has these 3 sections, sometimes it has those 2 sections, sometimes that melody has something strange that isn't in any of them. I think this is very much how we identify tunes, as opposed to asking like, what is a tune, what is this tune, and what is it not? So it's a very interesting kind of fluid, real-life way of thinking of tune identities, and I really love this term, family resemblance, for this. I think it's a big breakthrough, because, I mean, it's a 100-year-old breakthrough, but we're still sitting here fighting about what is this, is it Jewish, is it not Jewish? Actually, all we need to do is think about this term, family resemblance, and we realize that the question is an open question, it's a fuzzy question, it needs to have a fuzzy answer. So it's not clean, right? And we shouldn't ask it, and we don't need to fight about it in those terms. So, okay, that's one thing. The thing I wanted to say is I'm aware that we're a very mixed group of people here. This is anyway the intermediate and advanced workshop together. There are some people who have been doing this for 10 years and they know every single term that Joel said. And there are other people who are just starting and they don't know most of the terms that Joel said. So what I would like to do is to organize, maybe Sylvia and Susie are the best people in the world for doing crash courses in introduction to classical music. If you would like to do something like that, maybe tomorrow we can talk about it. You're not forced to do it because you're here as artists in residence. But I think we need a crash course in what's Berengovsky, what's Kostakovsky, what's Hasidic, what's Freydish. We just need, like, you know, the dummies version of that so we can move ahead. You know, there's a book, there's a whole series of books called The Dummy's Guide to Car Repair.
Such and such for dummies.
Such and such for dummies, right. That's not a put down. It just means it's the essential stuff that you need to know without all the fluff around it.
There's one called Existentialism for dummies.
Yes, I never know what that means to me. Anyway, so it means nothing. So if you're feeling lost, there are other people who are also feeling lost. I think it's worth, you know, we got a lot out of this anyway. Different people got different things out of it. And we make it our mission to bring everybody up to date on the terms that we've been using here, okay? Right?
Yes.
We're going to do that. All right.
I just want to add 2 things to kind of contextualize this a little bit. And I want to say, first of all, what we just said about tune families, I think it's an important tool if we really understand the concept. It's an important tool for learning, because for me, you know, in my head, there's a map of all the tunes that I know, and it's not always very clear, but you know, one of the things, you know, like Joe, when you're learning that tune, it's like, when you learn a tune, you remember, oh, it starts on the 5, but then the second section is starting, well, whatever, like you give yourself hints, concept. But also, the other thing that I do often is, I say, oh, this tune is like that other tune, but in, you know, like with this and this difference. And the second section is like that other section, except, you know, it goes up and instead of down, something like that, you know? And kind of having a map, trying to map all these things, it helps me actually place, and the more tunes I learn, the more I can like add. I don't have a physical database. I also have a physical database, but I have a database of, you know, like these are all the tunes that go to the 5 on the first, and this all that. And you know, relatedly, I mean, Makam is kind of a system of organizing that in a way, and you can say, you know, it's like this is in this Makam because it starts on, you know, on the 1 and goes to the 5, as opposed to the same exact notes, but it starts on the 5 and goes down or something.
Yeah, Ilya just pointed out a wonderful example of this recently. 2 tunes that were living next door to each other in my brain that had never met each other. And one of them goes, very fast, dancey tune. And the other one, which goes. And I had loved those tunes forever. And Ilya said, well, you know they're the same tune, right? Like, no, I never noticed that they're the same tune. And composers use this a lot. And it's, you know, just because something is fast, it's worth putting it under the microscope and finding out that it turns out to be also very deep. And actually, I believe that the depth that it has when it's slow, that subliminally we feel that when it's fast. That this doesn't feel silly because of it. Because underneath this, we feel this. With that, why don't we take a break?
And so, well, I just wanted to add one more thing, which is, you know, especially for people who are new to this, just saw a little bit of a glimpse of how the klezmer scene works, which or what it is, which I guess it's kind of a group of nerds who can also really play really well. and like, you know, none of us will, you know, become Joel, or, you know, and none of us will become any of us. Like, you will never, you know.
Why would you want to?
Well, but what I mean is that we have to kind of strive to be a little bit of Joel, and a little bit of, like, practice the nerdy attitudes, you know, fall in love with, you know, with old recordings, and you're like, wow, why is this? Oh, this sounds like, you know, like, you don't have to study all of them, although there is kind of almost a finite number, except that every day you find new ones. But this attitude, I think, is very important, and at the same time as saying, I'm going to play the hell out of my instruments, you know, as much as I can, while also being, you know, a nerdy researcher, not, you know, in a good way.
The klezmer scene is a very well-educated bunch, and they get, well, there used to be this online email thing. What was it called? World Music from a Jewish Land. There used to be one of these long discussions about all the stuff we're talking about now. Now it's kind of devolved down to various Facebook sites and so forth. But the Balkan scene, the Eastern European Folklife Center, I don't know if any of you get their email letter, but they have discussions like this every day. And like professors meeting with folk dancers, meeting with, you know, the Mark Forey and Carol Silverman, all these people that we've known for hundreds of years. Very, very intense discussions about, I mean, they're like way new.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, our discussions that we have, I
Yes.
would put down the Facebook discussions and so forth. I mean, they're, you know,
They're pretty
discussions that
interesting.
we're all kind of in.
Right.
Pretty remarkable.
Anyway, we're inviting you to become part of this
Yeah.
community of nerdy players.
Yeah.
And you know, practice, like, just like you have to learn how to dance the music in order to play the music for dancing, you kind of have to learn a little bit how to, you know, do some research and how to, you know, analyze stuff, you know, beyond just learning the tunes. It's also important, and again, you know, start small and analyze one tune, and then next thing you know, you'll be
I
Google searching.
invited Ilya to my university, and he prepared a research paper for it, and then he actually took it to a conference.
I know.
So, watch out.
Gonna be a doctor soon. Anyway, so let's take a short break, and we should also, you know, discuss what we heard. I have many comments, but I don't want to put them right now.
Do you want to learn one of those tunes, or did you want to do something else?
Okay, so it is now 4:52. We have about an hour and 8 minutes until the end of this workshop today, and we should really try and finish at 6 because we have a concert tonight, a faculty concert that the faculty has to prepare for a little bit. And in general, it's a good idea to finish on time, at least in the first day. So there are two options I would propose, and we can kind of vote on this a little bit. One is that we come back together and we learn one of the versions of this, of, you know, whichever one we choose to learn. The Ragweit's Mining is kind of a good one, but and we work on that a little bit, and we review whatever we learned this morning. The other option is to split into instrument classes and work in separate instruments, which is also a great idea. I would say it's a little bit, not a lot of time for this, but we could do it. So, any thoughts? Split or stay? Well, I'm hearing two things at the same time, and then
Yeah.
okay, split, stay.
Okay.
Sorry.
Stay.
Also, another reason to stay all together is that some of the teachers are not yet here, like Laurent and Ted-Fum. They'll be here tomorrow, and so tomorrow we can really split even better.
So let's take a break, but before you do, I also just want to say that part of the strategy of learning here, you really